He was a war hero, symbol of the common man, and the seventh president of the United States. But Andrew Jackson's legacy carries blemishes that echo to this day. In 1830, Jackson signed into law the Indian Removal Act. The measure authorized the forced transfer of Native peoples living east of the Mississippi River to territories to the west. Under the discourse of progress, thousands were uprooted from their ancestral lands. The most tragic outcome became known as the Trail of Tears. The Cherokee people, among others, were forced to travel hundreds of miles on foot under hunger, cold, and disease. Thousands are estimated to have died along the way. It was one of the darkest pages in American history. But Jackson didn't stop there. He declared war on the Bank of the United States, which he considered a tool of the rich and powerful. He vetoed its renewal and withdrew federal deposits. The result? Financial instability that helped trigger a severe economic crisis years later. Andrew Jackson, to some, a defender of the people. For others, the author of some of the most devastating decisions ever made in the White House. A president who, to this day, divides opinion. He assumed the presidency at the worst possible time. Abraham Lincoln had been assassinated. The Civil War had just ended, and a divided nation needed to be rebuilt. That was the challenge of Andrew Johnson, the 17th President of the United States, and one of the most troubled in history. In April 1865, Johnson, then Vice President, inherited the White House upon Lincoln's death. Ahead of him, a monumental task: to reunite the North and the South and define the fate of millions of people newly freed from slavery. It was the era of Reconstruction. But Johnson soon went on a collision course with Congress. He advocated a quick and mild pardon to the Southern states, while radical Republicans demanded firm guarantees of rights for former slaves. Johnson vetoed civil protection laws. Congress overrode his vetoes. With each clash, the gulf between the powers deepened. Tensions flared when Johnson tried to fire Secretary of War Edwin Stanton in defiance of a newly passed law limiting that presidential power. For Congress, it was a last straw. In 1868, Andrew Johnson became the first president in American history to be impeached. The Senate trial captured the nation's attention. To impeach him, a two-thirds vote was needed. In the end, the conviction failed by a single margin, 1 vote. Andrew Johnson remained in office, but politically ruined. Andrew Johnson survived by a thread, but his name was marked as that of a president who, instead of uniting a wounded nation, deepened its divisions. A lesson in the limits of power, and how a single vote can change history. He won one of the largest re-elections in American history. Months later, he was forced to leave the White House in disgrace. The story of Richard Nixon is that of a brilliant, ambitious, and deeply distrustful man whose own paranoia ultimately destroyed his presidency. Richard Nixon came to power in 1969 as the 37th President of the United States. He was an experienced politician, skilled in international relations. He opened dialogue with China, negotiated with the Soviet Union, and sought to end the Vietnam War. In 1972, he was re-elected by a landslide, winning in almost every state in the country. But in the dark of that same year, something had gone wrong. In the early hours of June 17, 1972, 5 men were arrested breaking into the Democratic Party headquarters in the Watergate complex of buildings in Washington. They carried listening equipment and money. What looked like an ordinary break-in was actually the thread of a skein that would lead to the heart of power. The real crime wasn't just the invasion. It was the attempt to hide it. The White House has used its influence to stifle investigations, pay for silence, and obstruct justice. 2 Washington Post journalists, Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, pulled the string. Gradually, the connection between the invaders and Nixon's re-election campaign came to light. Then came the devastating revelation. Nixon secretly recorded conversations in the Oval Office. Those tapes could prove what he knew, and when he knew it, the president fought to keep them secret, claiming executive privilege. But the Supreme Court ruled unanimously that he would have to hand them over. The recordings revealed his direct participation in the cover-up. Trapped with no support in Congress and facing near certain impeachment, Nixon made an unprecedented decision. On August 8, 1974, he announced to the country on television that he would leave office. The next day, he became the first and, to this day, the only president of the United States to resign. Richard Nixon left the White House waving, with a forced smile, boarding the helicopter that would take him away. Left behind was a shaken nation, and a word that has become synonymous with political scandal, Watergate. His story is an eternal reminder that in power, it is not crime that usually brings down a leader, but cover-up. He was young, charismatic, and popular. The economy was growing. The country was experiencing times of optimism. But at the height of his popularity, Bill Clinton found himself at the center of one of the biggest political scandals in American history, a scandal that nearly cost him his presidency. Bill Clinton arrived at the White House in 1993 as the 42nd president of the United States. A skilled communicator, he won over the public and was re-elected in 1996. Under his rule, the United States lived through an era of economic prosperity. But behind the scenes, a personal relationship would turn into a national crisis. In early 1998, a relationship between the president and Monica Lewinsky, a young White House intern, surfaced. The case exploded in the press and dominated the news. On national television, Clinton vehemently denied it, saying he had no relationship with the woman. But investigations continued. The real legal problem wasn't the relationship itself. It was the issue of Clinton having lied about it under oath. Prosecutor Kenneth Starr conducted an extensive investigation. As the evidence piled up, the president was charged with perjury and obstruction of justice. The nation watched divided. In December 1998, the House of Representatives approved the impeachment of Bill Clinton. He would become only the second president in American history to go through this after Andrew Johnson. The case went to trial in the Senate, with the entire country following every step. In early 1999, the Senate delivered its verdict. There were not enough votes to convict him. Bill Clinton was acquitted and remained in office until the end of his term. Despite the scandal, he left the presidency with surprisingly high approval ratings. Bill Clinton survived politically, but his name was forever linked to the scandal. His story raises a question that still divides opinion. How far a leader's private life becomes a public matter, and what the real way lies at the helm of a nation. No modern American president has provoked so much passion and so much revolt at the same time. Loved by millions, rejected by millions. Donald Trump didn't just rule the United States. He split the country in half. And, like no other before him, he turned the controversy itself into a political force. Businessman, television presenter, and well-known name throughout the country, Donald Trump was the 45th president of the United States from 2017 to 2021. He came to power as an outsider to the establishment, vowing to challenge the system. His direct, combative, and unpredictable style delighted his supporters and outraged his opponents. There was no middle ground. Wikipedia. It was during his first term that Trump entered history in an unprecedented way. He became the only American president to be impeached twice. The first, in 2019, connected with pressures on Ukraine. The second, in 2021, after the events on Capitol Hill. In both, he was acquitted by the Senate and remained, or, in the second case, ended his term. But the historical mark remained. The most explosive episode came with a defeat in the 2020 elections. Trump refused to accept the result and claimed, without evidence proven by the courts, that there was fraud. At the end of the 2020 election, which Trump lost, his allies and lawmakers tried unsuccessfully to keep him in power by contesting the official vote count. The tension culminated in the storming of the Capitol on January 6, 2021, where the most shocking images of Moderna, GovTrack, and then came the improbable. Against all the expectations of his opponents, Trump has not disappeared. He's back. His second stint in the presidency began with his inauguration as the 47th president on January 20th, 2025. His current term ends on January 20th, 2029, a return to the White House that few leaders in history have achieved, an extraordinary political turnaround. Wikipedia GovTrack. Donald Trump remains, to this day, one of the most divisive figures in American history. For his supporters, a leader who stood up to the system. To his critics, a threat to institutions. What no one can deny is the size of his brand. A president who rewrote the rules of the political game, and who continues in the present to divide and set America's course.